A scenic stretch of highway along Virginia's coast became the backdrop to one of the state's most chilling unsolved mysteries. Between 1986 and 1989, 4 young couples were either murdered or vanished in eerily similar circumstances, each case linked by isolated locations, abandoned vehicles, and a haunting absence of answers. For decades, investigators wrestled with a terrifying question. Was there a serial killer stalking lovers' lanes, or were these tragedies unconnected, bound only by coincidence and geography? The evidence told a fragmented story. Bodies found miles apart, some never recovered. Law enforcement launched task forces, followed leads, even explored the possibility that the killer was someone posing as police. Yet for all the manpower and media attention, no one was ever arrested. As time passed, the case became legend. Whispers of a predator on the Parkway became part of the local psyche. Families of the victims continued to push for answers, and as new forensic techniques emerged, long dormant leads were re-examined. In recent years, one shocking development changed everything. The narrative, once seemingly unified, began to split. Were these truly the work of a lone killer, or something even more unsettling? Welcome to Bad Things. Join us as we unpack the timeline, explore the theories, and break down what most likely happened in the Colonial Parkway murders. Do you want to bring bad things with you wherever you go? Our episodes are now available as a podcast. Look us up on your favorite podcast app and listen to the most truth-seeking true crime podcast out there. October 1986. Kathy Thomas and Becky Dowski. In the fall of 1986, 27-year-old Kathy Thomas and 21-year-old Becky Dowski were dating while living near Williamsburg, Virginia. On October 9th, they were last seen after spending the evening together. 3 days later, Kathy's white Honda Civic was found at a scenic overlook along the Colonial Parkway. It had been pushed down an embankment, its doors open. Inside, park rangers discovered the women's bodies. Both had been killed with extraordinary violence, strangled and their throats slashed. No valuables were missing. Wallets remained in place. There was no sign of sexual assault. Investigators noted the scene felt arranged, even manipulated. The vehicle's interior showed signs of deliberate control, an impression echoed by early FBI involvement. This wasn't a crime of passion, one agent later said. It was deliberate, precise. Whoever did it knew what they were doing and knew that spot. Kathy, a U.S. Naval Academy graduate who had faced discrimination for being gay, and Becky, a college student from a respected family, had been left in a way that suggested not just murder, but a message. September 1987. David Knobling and Robin Edwards. Nearly a year later, 20-year-old David Knobling took 14-year-old Robin Edwards for a nighttime drive at Ragged Island Wildlife Refuge, a secluded area popular with couples. On December 20th, David's black Ford Ranger was found abandoned. The keys were still in the ignition, the door ajar, and the windshield wipers inexplicably swiping in the rain. 3 days later, the bodies of David and Robin were discovered along the riverbank nearby. Both had been shot in the head at close range. Like the first crime, robbery was ruled out. Nothing had been stolen, and the truck showed no sign of a chase or struggle. The scene gave off a sense of calm interruption, as if the victims had been approached by someone they didn't initially fear. Investigators began to consider a disturbing possibility. Someone was targeting couples in isolated areas. Former FBI agent Maureen O'Connell later pointed to a pattern. Always on weekends or holidays, always young people, always remote. There was a method to it. April 1988. Keith Call and Cassandra Haley. In April 1988, Keith Call, 20, and Cassandra Haley, 18, went on their first date. attending a college party in Newport News. They never made it home. Keith's red Toyota Celica was later found on the Colonial Parkway, parked neatly near an overlook. The keys were still in the ignition, the driver's door shut. Inside were Cassandra's purse and Keith's wallet, open and untouched. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, no forced entry. Just two people who had vanished. Despite extensive searches of the surrounding woods and waterways, neither body was ever found. They are still officially missing. The details: abandoned car, valuables left behind, no evidence of robbery, echoed earlier cases. The fact that the wallet and purse were openly visible suggested the couple might have been preparing to show identification, perhaps to someone they believed was in authority. This crime shook the public further. Now, not only were young people being murdered in the shadows, but a couple had seemingly been erased without a trace. September 1989. Daniel Lauer and Anna Maria Phelps. On Labor Day weekend 1989, Daniel Lauer, 21, and Anna Maria Phelps, 18, left Amelia County, Virginia, headed to Virginia Beach. Daniel was helping Anna Maria, his younger brother's girlfriend, move some belongings. Days later, their gold Chevy Nova was found abandoned at a rest area off Interstate 64, neatly parked on the wrong side of the highway, facing west instead of east. Inside were all of their possessions, undisturbed. The vehicle didn't appear tampered with. For over a month, the two were missing. Then, in early October, hunters found skeletal remains wrapped in a blanket in nearby woods. The remains were identified as Daniel and Anna Maria. The bodies were too decomposed to determine cause of death. No items had been taken. The staging again raised questions. Why was the car parked the wrong way? Why were the bodies hidden but not buried? And once more, why had no one seen or heard anything? A growing pattern and growing fear. By late 1989, 8 young people had either been murdered or disappeared under similar conditions. Lovers in cars, remote locations, weekends or holidays, vehicles abandoned with valuables inside. Some scenes looked arranged, even artificial. Multiple agencies, FBI, Virginia State Police, and local departments formed a task force. They canvassed the parkway, questioned Navy sailors, investigated impersonators, and considered whether the killer had law enforcement ties. Former profiler Jim Clemente later noted, "When you see wallets open, ID left out, and no struggle, someone likely impersonated a cop. That's the level of trust we're talking about." Despite the task force's efforts, no arrests were made. As the 90s arrived, the murders faded from the headlines, but not from the hearts of the victims' families. Memorials were held. Pressure was applied to law enforcement. New leads occasionally surfaced. None panned out. The crimes came to be known collectively as the Colonial Parkway murders, though whether they were truly connected remained a subject of debate. The pattern seemed undeniable, yet the differences raised questions. Was this the work of a single killer evolving in method, or were there multiple predators exploiting the same vulnerabilities in a specific time and place? It would take decades, and one groundbreaking piece of DNA evidence for investigators to start finding answers. The one killer theory. From the beginning, many believed one person was behind all 4 Colonial Parkway incidents. The crimes spanned a tight radius in southeastern Virginia. All occurred between 1986 and 1989, and all involved young couples attacked in secluded areas, often found in or near their vehicles, with valuables left behind. The crimes happened on weekends or holidays. To many, that was too much overlap to ignore. Supporters of this theory argue that the killer may have adapted over time, switching weapons and strategies to confuse investigators. They point to a consistent victim profile and settings, especially locations near water and quiet roads. "There is a pattern here I cannot ignore," said Maureen O'Connell, a former FBI agent who reviewed the case years later. "Some believe the changes in method, from knives to guns to disappearance, were deliberate misdirections. Others think the killer grew more confident, refining their approach with each crime. However, not everyone agrees. The major challenge to this theory is consistency. No single method, no recurring weapon, no reliable forensic link. Serial killers often follow ritual patterns. If one person committed all 4 crimes, they broke that mold repeatedly. Even among law enforcement, doubts grew over time. The cop or the pretender. Several crime scenes showed signs that the victims had willingly interacted with someone. Cars were not ransacked, windows were rolled down, wallets left out. Some investigators believe the killer may have impersonated law enforcement to gain trust. "It suggests a level of compliance," said former FBI profiler Jim Clemente. "They weren't ambushed, they were approached, and they cooperated." In this theory, the killer might have used a badge, a flashing light, or authoritative language to control the victims. Some early suspects included park rangers, auxiliary officers, or even security guards familiar with the area. Despite how compelling this scenario sounds, no hard evidence was ever found to confirm police impersonation. No known officer reported encounters on those nights, and no known suspects were identified as posing as cops. "It's plausible," said Lonnie Coombs, a former prosecutor, "but we have zero proof." A hate crime at the start. Some believe the first double murder, Kathy Thomas and Becky Dowski in 1986, may have had a very specific motive that didn't apply to the other cases. Kathy and Becky were in a same-sex relationship, and the Colonial Parkway was known at the time as a quiet rendezvous for LGBTQ couples. It was also known to those who might seek to harm them. Forensic analyst Dr. Laura Petler observed that Kathy's wounds were significantly more brutal than Becky's, suggesting personal rage. Some investigators and family members believe the crime was motivated by hatred, either from someone who knew the women or a stranger who targeted them for their relationship. The vigilante enforcer. One psychological theory suggests the killer or killers may have seen themselves as moral judges, targeting people they believed were behaving immorally. Under this framework, the selection of victims wasn't random. It was based on perceived sins. Jim Clemente once proposed that a killer might have been watching secluded areas and waiting for couples engaging in behavior he found offensive, whether due to age differences, same-sex relationships, or premarital intimacy. This theory fits with the idea of someone staging the scenes and avoiding theft, but it also assumes a level of ideological planning that lacks tangible evidence. No manifesto or message was ever found. No symbols or statements left behind. If the killer had a personal code, he kept it private. The wrong place, wrong time theory. Some family members believe their loved ones were simply in the wrong place at the wrong moment. Carl Knobling, father of David Knobling, has long speculated that David and Robin Edwards may have witnessed something illegal, perhaps a drug deal, at Ragged Island the night they were killed. In this view, the killings weren't planned. The victims were eliminated as witnesses to a crime. Other investigators have applied similar logic to the 1989 rest stop deaths of Anna Marie Phelps and Daniel Lauer, who might have stopped to help someone, encountered danger, and were murdered in a moment of opportunity. These theories don't require a serial killer or elaborate motive, just unlucky timing. But they also don't explain the calmness of the scenes or why items were left untouched. Crimes of panic don't usually involve staging or controlled disposal of bodies. Still, the idea of chance encounters with violent people has remained on the table. Fringe and false leads. Over the years, various individuals and fringe theories have surfaced. One such figure was Fred Atwell, a former deputy who became publicly involved in the case after revealing leaked crime scene photos in 2009. Atwell later defrauded victims' families and was imprisoned. Though never tied to the murders, his erratic behavior drew suspicion online. Another name occasionally raised is Michael Nicolau, a former soldier linked to crimes in New England. Some internet sleuths speculated about a Virginia connection, but no evidence ever supported it. Other theories, like intelligence agency involvement due to Kathy Thomas's Navy background, also emerged, mostly from forums or blogs, without factual basis. Local legends and jailhouse rumors added more noise. No credible suspect beyond those already investigated has ever been publicly named. When all the evidence, interviews, timelines, and forensic breakthroughs are laid side by side, one conclusion rises above the rest. Not because it's dramatic, but because it requires the fewest assumptions and fits best with what we now know. The so-called Colonial Parkway murders were not committed by a single killer. For decades, the idea of a serial predator stalking Virginia's lovers' lanes shaped public imagination. But with time, patterns that once seemed unified now reveal fractures. Differences in weapon, location, and victimology, once rationalized as the evolution of a cunning killer, are now better explained as the work of multiple offenders, operating independently across similar terrain. The strongest argument for this conclusion is rooted in evidence, not theory. In 2024, DNA evidence definitively identified Alan W. Wilmer Sr. as the man who killed David Knobling and Robin Edwards in 1987. His DNA was found on Robin's body, and he has since been linked to at least one other unrelated homicide in the region. Wilmer died in 2017, but authorities made clear if he were alive, he would have been arrested. What matters here is not just that Wilmer was confirmed to have committed one of the murders, but that his DNA has not been connected to any of the others. This breaks the chain. The series, once viewed as the work of one predator, no longer holds together under scrutiny. Wilmer wasn't a police officer. He didn't pose as one. He wasn't part of any law enforcement group. He was a fisherman, a quiet man with no criminal record, known to work the waters and hunt the woods of southeastern Virginia. In short, not the figure investigators had imagined for years. But Wilmer did have access, means, and a clear pattern. He was familiar with isolated locations. He had a pickup truck. He knew how to blend in. In Robin and David's case, there was no sign of struggle, suggesting he approached calmly, possibly under the guise of helping or simply initiating conversation. Once they were within reach, he used a gun to overpower them. They were killed execution style, their bodies discarded near water. There's strong circumstantial evidence that Wilmer may have also been responsible for the 1988 disappearance of Keith Cole and Cassandra Haley. At the time, Wilmer drove a blue pickup truck with a vanity plate that read M. Raw. That exact plate was reported by witnesses in the original files tied to the night Keith and Cassandra vanished. The vehicle was seen near the parkway. Yet Wilmer was never charged. He was briefly questioned and even passed a polygraph, something that, in hindsight, was a major investigative failure. As Bill Thomas, Kathy's brother, later said, "I was disturbed back in 1988 that they had Wilmer and they let him go. And now we know." It's plausible that Wilmer approached Keith and Cassandra under friendly or official pretenses, maybe acting like a helpful passerby or even faking an authority role. Their wallets and purse were visible in the vehicle, and the car appeared to be calmly parked. The pair could have been lured into Wilmer's truck, then driven away. Neither body has ever been found. As a commercial fisherman, Wilmer had knowledge of deep water access points. If he disposed of the remains by boat, they may never be recovered. This fits his known behavior: opportunistic, targeting, lethal force, and use of remote waterways for disposal. It also aligns with other victims linked to him by DNA, including Teresa Howell, murdered months later in 1989. If Wilma is responsible for the second and third Parkway crimes, 1987 and 1988, it becomes unlikely that he committed the first or fourth. The 1986 killing of Kathy Thomas and Becky Dowski bears none of his signatures. In that case, the women were killed inside their car. There was no firearm used. Kathy suffered especially brutal injuries. Her neck nearly severed. Becky was strangled. The killer used ligatures and left no signs of sexual assault. More importantly, no DNA, including Wilma's, has ever been matched to the scene. The nature of that attack suggests not opportunism, but intimate rage or personal motive. One plausible scenario is that Kathy, an openly gay Naval Academy graduate, in an era where homophobia was rampant, was targeted deliberately. Investigators have long considered the possibility that someone knew Kathy or objected violently to her relationship with Becky. The injuries support that interpretation. Kathy bore the brunt of the violence. Dr. Laura Petler noted, "He dealt with the body with a lot more contempt. It felt personal." A hate crime is not just a theoretical possibility. It fits the scene's emotional tone. And if so, then the killer likely knew or recognized Kathy. That kind of personalized motive doesn't align with Wilma's cold, predatory opportunism. If Kathy and Becky were killed by someone they knew, or someone with ideological hatred, the case becomes a standalone. Not the beginning of a serial spree, but a separate tragedy. That crime scene also showed signs of staging, but the motivation behind the staging may have been different. Not deception for survival, but for theatricality or misdirection. Now consider the final double homicide: Anna Marie Phelps and Daniel Lauer in 1989. Their car was found at a rest area, parked calmly, but on the wrong side of the highway. Their bodies, discovered weeks later, were wrapped in a blanket and hidden in nearby woods. Unlike the earlier crimes, there's no forensic evidence, no DNA, no cause of death. And while Wilma was active in 1989, there's no direct link placing him with Anna Marie and Daniel. That said, his profile fits. He was active in the area at the time. He had already killed by then. The wrapping of the bodies in a blanket suggests someone who didn't panic, a killer who took time, planned concealment, and may have had access to tools and materials on hand. But without DNA or a witness, it's speculative. It's possible that Wilma was responsible, and we simply lack the evidence. It's equally plausible that a third unknown individual committed this murder, possibly a trucker, drifter, or another predator moving through the area. And that's what makes the multi-killer theory most compelling. It doesn't stretch timelines, assume wildly different motives, or force four crimes into a single profile. It simply allows that more than one dangerous person existed in the Tidewater region during the late 1980s, and that they each acted independently, leaving behind tragedies that only seemed connected. The serial killer narrative offered comfort in its clarity: a single villain, a single motive. But the evidence no longer supports it. In fact, it never truly did. What makes the multi-killer theory so persuasive is that it works with the evidence, not around it. It acknowledges that Wilma was a predator with a consistent MO, that Kathy and Becky's killer had a different motive and approach, and that Anna Maria and Daniel's case remains ambiguous, but not necessarily linked. As Steve Spagnola, author and former detective, put it, "It's scarier, but it's more likely. More than one predator operated in the same region, and they used the same kind of places, because that's where victims were vulnerable. This theory also explains why decades passed without resolution. Each case may have required a different investigative approach, different forensic profiles, and different suspects. By trying to link them all, law enforcement may have missed critical details. With Wilma now confirmed as one of the killers and likely the person behind at least 2 of the cases, it's time to let go of the serial killer myth. The truth is messier, but more grounded. Not one killer in the shadows, but several slipping through cracks in a system not ready to see them. As Bill Thomas said in 2024, "We're finally seeing movement. Law enforcement is cooperating more. DNA is being tested. I'm more optimistic than I've been in 37 years. The optimism comes not from false closure, but from clarity. One killer has been identified. Others may follow. Families are no longer chasing shadows. They're chasing answers." What most likely happened is this. 4 different couples, over 4 years, crossed paths with 2, possibly 3 different killers, each exploiting the isolation and vulnerability of Virginia's backroads. Only one has been unmasked. The others remain questions. But those questions are no longer hidden in fog. They're being pursued with light.